Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted the radio equipment one more time. The desert heat was unbearable, even inside the makeshift communication tent. She had been working as a communications specialist for 3 years now, always staying behind the scenes while the real soldiers did the important work. At least that's what she told herself every day. The base camp was buzzing with activity. Soldiers moved back and forth, preparing for what everyone knew would be a dangerous mission. Sarah's job was simple: maintain radio contact with the teams in the field and relay messages back to headquarters. She wasn't trained for combat like the others. She wasn't brave like them either, or so she believed. "Martinez, you getting clear signals from Alpha Team?" Sergeant Williams called out as he passed by her station. "Yes, sir. All channels are working perfectly," Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across the radio controls with practiced ease. She had always been good with technology, which is why they assigned her to communications when she first enlisted. Back then, she thought she would be helping from a safe distance, never imagining she would end up so close to actual combat zones. The mission briefing had been tense that morning. Intelligence reports showed enemy forces had taken control of a small village about 20 miles east. Civilians were trapped inside and a rescue operation was being planned. Sarah listened from the back of the room as General Morrison explained the details to the combat teams. She took notes about radio frequencies and backup communication protocols, but her mind wandered as she watched the serious faces of the soldiers who would actually be risking their lives. "The enemy has positioned snipers on the high ground surrounding the village," General Morrison had said, pointing to the map with his laser pointer. "We'll need precise coordination between all teams to ensure civilian safety and mission success." Sarah had nodded along with everyone else, but deep down she felt like an outsider. These men and women were real warriors, while she was just someone who talked into radios all day. She had joined the military hoping to make a difference, but lately she wondered if her contribution even mattered. As the afternoon wore on, the teams began moving out. Sarah watched through the tent flap as Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie teams loaded into their vehicles. Each soldier checked their weapons, their gear, their protective equipment. Sarah touched her own sidearm, a pistol she had only fired during basic training and mandatory practice sessions. She had never drawn it in a real situation and hoped she never would have to. "Alpha Team, this is base. Radio check. Over." Sarah spoke into her headset as the convoy disappeared into the dusty horizon. "Base, this is Alpha Team Leader. Signal is clear. Beginning approach to target area. Over." For the next 2 hours, Sarah monitored multiple radio channels simultaneously. She tracked the positions of all 3 teams as they moved through the desert terrain toward the village. Her training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, but she could feel her heart rate increasing as the teams got closer to enemy territory. The first sign of trouble came when Bravo Team reported movement on the ridge overlooking the village. "Base, we have eyes on enemy positions. Count at least 6 hostiles with sniper rifles. They have clear sight lines to the village entrance." Sarah immediately relayed this information to all teams and to headquarters. She pulled up the tactical map on her computer screen, marking the enemy positions as they were reported. Her role was to be the information hub, keeping everyone connected and aware of the changing situation. "Charlie Team, adjust your approach vector to avoid the sight lines marked on your displays," Sarah transmitted. She had spent hours studying the terrain maps and could visualize exactly where each team was positioned. "Copy that. Base, Charlie Team moving to alternate route." As the sun began to set, the rescue operation entered its most dangerous phase. The teams had to move into the village under cover of darkness while avoiding the enemy snipers. Sarah's tent became the nerve center of the entire operation, with multiple radio conversations happening simultaneously. She coordinated between the teams, relayed updates to headquarters, and maintained contact with the evacuation helicopters standing by at a safe distance. Despite being miles away from the actual fighting, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility. Every piece of information she passed along could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers in the field. "Base, this is Alpha Team. We're in position at the village perimeter, beginning civilian evacuation procedures now." Sarah logged the time and status update, then immediately contacted the helicopter pilots. "Evac Birds, Alpha Team has begun civilian extraction. Estimate 15 minutes to package ready for pickup." The minutes ticked by slowly. Sarah could hear occasional gunfire through the radio, but the teams maintained their discipline and continued following the plan. She monitored their progress on her screens, moving digital markers to track their positions in real time. Then everything changed in an instant. Base. Basey, this is Bravo team. We're taking heavy fire from the ridge. Multiple casualties. Request immediate support. Sarah's hands flew across her controls as she tried to get a clear picture of what was happening. Bravo team, can you identify the source of fire? What's your status? Unknown sniper position. Not on any of our previous markers. Alpha team is pinned down in the village square. The situation was falling apart rapidly. Sarah could hear the panic in the voices on the radio, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was exactly the kind of emergency her training had prepared her for, even though she had never experienced anything this intense before. She quickly contacted headquarters and requested air support, then began trying to coordinate a response from Charlie team. But as she listened to the reports coming in from the field, she realized that something was very wrong. The enemy snipers seemed to know exactly where the teams would be, as if they had been watching and waiting. All teams, this is base. Be advised that enemy forces may have advanced knowledge of your positions. Recommend immediate tactical adjustment. As Sarah worked frantically to help coordinate the response to save her fellow soldiers, she had no idea that her own actions in the coming hours would completely change how everyone saw her role in the mission. The radio crackled with desperate voices as the situation in the village continued to deteriorate. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she switched between communication channels, trying to maintain contact with all three teams while coordinating the emergency response. Charlie team, can you get a visual on the sniper position that's pinning down Alpha team? Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the chaos she was hearing through her headset. Negative base, we're still 2 clicks out from the village. Cannot establish line of sight to the ridge. Sarah stared at the tactical map on her screen, studying the terrain around the village. The original intelligence had identified 6 sniper positions, but this new threat was coming from somewhere else entirely. She traced the sight lines with her finger, trying to calculate where an additional sniper could be hidden. Bravo team, this is base. Can you give me a bearing on the incoming fire? Base, the shots are coming from... Wait. The radio went silent for several long seconds. Sarah held her breath, waiting for a response. Finally, the voice came back, filled with confusion. Base, I don't think it's coming from the ridge at all. The angle is all wrong. Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. If the sniper wasn't on the ridge with the others, where could they be positioned? She pulled up satellite images of the area on her second monitor, scanning for any elevated positions that might have been missed during the initial reconnaissance. Alpha team, what's your current position in the village? Sarah asked, needing more precise information to figure out the geometry of the sniper's location. We're in the main square, taking cover behind a fountain. The civilians are in the building directly north of our position. Sarah marked Alpha team's position on her map and drew lines representing possible sniper locations. Her training in mathematics and physics, which had helped her excel in communications technology, now became crucial as she calculated angles and distances. Alpha team, when the sniper fires, can you determine if the shots are coming from above your position or at ground level? Stand by, base. More gunfire erupted through the radio. Base, the shots are definitely coming from above, but not from the ridge. It's like they're coming from directly overhead. Suddenly, Sarah realized what was happening. She zoomed in on the satellite image of the village and found what she was looking for. A tall water tower on the eastern edge of the village that hadn't been mentioned in any of the intelligence reports. All teams, this is base. I believe the sniper is positioned in the water tower on the eastern side of the village. Alpha team, can you confirm visual contact with a water tower to your east? Affirmative, base. There's definitely a water tower about 200 meters from our position. We can see movement up there now that we know where to look. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction at solving the puzzle, but the situation was still critical. The sniper in the water tower had a perfect view of the entire village and could see all of Alpha team's positions. Charlie team was still too far away to help, and Bravo team was dealing with the original snipers on the ridge. Headquarters, this is base. We've identified an additional enemy sniper position in a water tower overlooking the village. Alpha team is pinned down and cannot complete the civilian evacuation. Request immediate air support to neutralize the threat. Base, this is headquarters. Air support is not available for another 30 minutes due to refueling requirements. Can ground teams handle the situation? Sarah looked at her tactical display and felt her heart sink. Bravo team was pinned down by sniper fire from the ridge. Charlie team was still approaching and wouldn't arrive for at least 15 minutes. Alpha team was trapped in the village square with nowhere to go. The civilians they were trying to rescue were still trapped in the building, and the longer this went on, the more likely it became that enemy reinforcements would arrive. Negative, headquarters. Ground teams are all engaged or too far away to assist. As Sarah transmitted this response, she heard Alpha team leader's voice cut through the static. Base, we're running low on ammunition. If we can't neutralize that water tower sniper soon, we're going to have to abort the civilian evacuation. The thought of abandoning innocent people to save the soldiers was unbearable to Sarah. She had joined the military to help protect people, not to sit safely in a communication tent while others made life and death decisions in the field. Alpha team, what's the distance to the water tower from your position? Approximately 200 meters, base. Why do you ask? Sarah was quiet for a moment, calculating in her head. During her basic training, she had been an excellent marksman, consistently scoring in the top 10% of her class. But that was on a controlled range with paper targets, not in a combat situation with lives hanging in the balance. Alpha team, do any of your personnel have a clear shot at the water tower? Negative, base. The sniper has us pinned down. Every time we try to move to get a better angle, he fires at our position. Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She stood up from her communications desk and walked to the equipment locker where her gear was stored. Her hands moved automatically as she retrieved her rifle, the same weapon she had trained with but never fired in combat. Base station, this is Sarah. This is Communications Specialist Martinez, she said into her headset, suddenly aware that she was about to do something completely outside her assigned role. I'm going to attempt to neutralize the water tower sniper from my position. Martinez, what are you talking about? Came the immediate response from Alpha team leader. You're back at base camp. That's got to be at least 8 kilometers from our position. Sarah had already moved outside the communication tent and was setting up a shooting position on a small hill that overlooked the entire valley. Through her rifle scope, she could just make out the village in the distance. The water tower was barely visible, but she could see it. Alpha team, I have visual contact with the water tower. The range is approximately 7,800 meters. There was silence on the radio for several seconds before Alpha team leader responded. Martinez, that's an impossible shot. Even our best snipers wouldn't attempt something at that range with these conditions. Sarah adjusted her scope and checked the wind direction. She had studied ballistics extensively during her training, not because she planned to be a sniper, but because she was naturally curious about the physics involved. Now that knowledge might be the only thing standing between Alpha team and disaster. Alpha team, I'm going to take the shot. When you hear it, be ready to move toward the civilian evacuation point. As Sarah settled into her shooting position, she thought about all the times she had felt like just a support person, someone whose job didn't really matter. Now, with her fellow soldiers' lives depending on her, she was about to find out if she was capable of much more than anyone had ever imagined. Sarah's breathing slowed as she settled into the prone shooting position. She had practiced hundreds of times during training. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, despite the fact that she had never used it outside of controlled range conditions. Through her scope, the water tower looked impossibly small and distant. The wind was blowing from the southwest at approximately 12 miles per hour. Sarah made mental calculations for bullet drop and wind drift over the 7,800-meter distance. She had to account for the curvature of the Earth at this range, something she had only read about in advanced ballistics manuals. Alpha team, I need you to tell me when the sniper fires next so I can see his muzzle flash and confirm his exact position in the tower. Copy that. Base, stand by. Sarah waited, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Through her scope, she could see tiny figures moving in the village square. Those were her fellow soldiers pinned down and running out of options. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than the rifle in her hands. Muzzle flash visible. Top platform of the water tower, eastern side. Sarah adjusted her aim slightly and saw the brief flicker of light through her scope. Now she knew exactly where the enemy sniper was positioned. The shot would require perfect timing, perfect calculation, and more luck than she wanted to think about. Alpha team, I'm taking the shot in 10 seconds. Be ready to move. Sarah's heart rate slowed as she entered the focused state she had learned during marksmanship training. The world around her seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the crosshairs in her scope and the distant target. She calculated the exact moment to fire based on wind patterns and her own breathing cycle. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as the shot rang out across the desert. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet's trajectory, knowing it would take several seconds to travel the distance to the target. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited to see the result. "Base, did you take that shot?" Alpha team leader's voice crackled through the radio. "Affirmative. Impact in 3 seconds." Sarah held her breath as she watched through the scope. At the water tower, she saw a brief disturbance, but at this distance it was impossible to tell if she had hit the target or not. "Alpha team, can you confirm status of the water tower sniper?" There was a long pause before the response came. "Base, the sniper fire has stopped. We're moving to check on the civilians now." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Had she actually made the shot? At nearly 8 kilometers, it would be one of the longest confirmed sniper kills in military history. But she couldn't think about that now. The mission was still ongoing. "Charlie team, what's your ETA to support Alpha team with the civilian evacuation?" "Base, we're 5 minutes out from the village perimeter." Sarah maintained her position on the hill, keeping watch through her scope in case there were other threats she hadn't identified. She could see Alpha team moving toward the building where the civilians were being held. The original snipers on the ridge were still a threat, but Bravo team was keeping them occupied. "Alpha team, be advised that you still have hostile snipers on the ridge to your north. Stay low and use the buildings for cover." "Copy that, Base. We've reached the civilians. Beginning evacuation procedures now." Through her scope, Sarah watched as tiny figures emerged from the building in the village. Even at this distance, she could see that there were women and children among the group. The sight strengthened her resolve to make sure everyone got out safely. "Evac helicopters, this is Base. Alpha team has secured the civilians and is moving to the extraction point. The pickup zone is approximately 10 minutes. Base, this is Evac 1. We're standing by at the designated coordinates, ready for immediate pickup." As Sarah continued to monitor the situation through her scope, she noticed movement on the ridge where the enemy snipers were positioned. Bravo team had been engaging them for over an hour, but now she could see figures moving between the rocks in a way that suggested they might be trying to flank Bravo team's position. "Bravo team, this is Base. I have eyes on the ridge. It looks like some of the enemy snipers are moving to flank your position from the south. Base, we can't see them from our current position. Can you give us specifics?" Sarah studied the ridge through her scope, counting the moving figures and tracking their positions. Her elevated position at base camp gave her a unique perspective on the entire battlefield that none of the ground teams had. "Bravo team, I count 3 hostiles moving along the southern edge of the ridge, approximately 300 meters from your position. They appear to be carrying sniper rifles and are using the rock formations for cover." "Roger. Base, we're adjusting our position to counter the flanking attempt." Sarah realized that her role in this mission had completely changed. What had started as routine communication support had evolved into something she had never trained for. She was now acting as an Overwatch sniper and battlefield coordinator, using her elevated position to provide intelligence and support to all the teams simultaneously. "Alpha team, what's your status on the civilian evacuation?" "Base, we have 12 civilians secured and are moving toward the extraction point. Charlie team has linked up with us and is providing escort." Sarah felt a surge of relief as she watched the group moving safely away from the village through her scope. But the mission wasn't over yet. Bravo team was still engaged with enemy snipers on the ridge, and everyone had to get back to safety. "Bravo team, can you disengage and move to the extraction point?" "Negative, Base. If we leave our position, the enemy snipers will have a clear shot at the evacuation helicopters." Sarah understood the tactical situation immediately. Bravo team was sacrificing their own safety to protect the civilian evacuation. She scanned the ridge through her scope, looking for any way to help them. That's when she spotted something that made her blood run cold. Additional enemy vehicles were approaching the area from the east, heading directly toward the extraction point where the helicopters would land. The mission was about to become much more dangerous. "All teams, this is Base. We have enemy reinforcements approaching the extraction point from the east. Count at least 2 vehicles with armed personnel." The situation was rapidly becoming more complicated than anyone had anticipated, and Sarah found herself at the center of coordinating a response that would determine whether everyone made it home alive. Sarah's mind raced as she watched the enemy vehicles approaching through her scope. The timing couldn't have been worse. Alpha team and Charlie team were almost at the extraction point with the civilians. But if those vehicles arrived first, they would be walking into a trap. "Evac helicopters. This is Base, abort landing immediately." Enemy vehicles approaching extraction point. Repeat abort landing. Base, this is Evac 1. Roger, aborting approach. Where do you want us to set up the new extraction point? Sarah studied the terrain through her scope, looking for an alternative location that would be safe from the approaching enemy forces. Her knowledge of the area from hours of studying maps and satellite images was now proving invaluable. Evac 1, there's a clearing approximately 2 kilometers northwest of the original extraction point. It's on the far side of a hill that should provide cover from the enemy vehicles. Copy that. Base, moving to alternate extraction point now. Sarah immediately switched to the frequency for Alpha and Charlie teams. All ground teams' extraction point has been moved. New coordinates are being transmitted now. Enemy vehicles are approaching your current heading, so you'll need to change direction. Base, this is Alpha team leader. We copy the new coordinates, but that route will take us directly past the ridge where Bravo team is engaged with enemy snipers. Sarah could see the tactical problem clearly through her scope. The teams were caught between the enemy vehicles approaching from one direction and the snipers on the ridge from another. The new extraction point would require them to move across open ground that was covered by enemy fire. Bravo team, this is Base. Alpha and Charlie teams need to move past your position to reach the new extraction point. Can you provide covering fire? Base, we're pinned down ourselves. We can't expose our position to provide cover without taking heavy casualties. Sarah felt the weight of command decisions she had never been trained to make. Every option seemed to put someone at risk, but doing nothing would put everyone at risk. She had to think of a solution that would get all the teams out safely. Looking through her scope at the ridge where Bravo team was engaged, Sarah could see the muzzle flashes from the enemy snipers' positions. She counted at least 4 different firing positions spread across the rocky terrain. The range from her position was approximately 600 meters, closer than her previous shot, but still an extremely difficult distance. Bravo team, when I tell you to move, can you relocate to a position where you can provide covering fire for the other teams? Base, if we move from our current position, the enemy snipers will have clear shots at us. What if the enemy snipers weren't there anymore? Sarah asked, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. There was silence on the radio for several seconds before Bravo team leader responded. Base, are you saying what I think you're saying? Sarah was already adjusting her rifle for the new range and wind conditions. She had 4 targets to eliminate in rapid succession before any of them could react to her shots. It was the kind of precision shooting that was considered nearly impossible even under ideal conditions. All teams, in 60 seconds I'm going to engage the enemy snipers on the ridge. When the firing stops, Bravo team will move to provide covering fire, while Alpha and Charlie teams proceed to the new extraction point. Martinez, that's 4 targets at over 6 kilometers, came the concerned voice of Alpha team leader. Even if you make the first shot, they'll take cover after that. Sarah was calculating the timing and angles in her head. She would have to fire 4 shots in less than 30 seconds, adjusting for slightly different ranges and wind conditions for each target. The margin for error was essentially 0. Alpha team, I need you to create a distraction in exactly 45 seconds. Fire at the water tower or make some noise that will draw their attention away from the ridge. Copy that. Base. Distraction in 45 seconds. Sarah lined up her first shot on the enemy sniper position that was furthest to the left. She would work from left to right, using the recoil recovery time to adjust for the next target. Her breathing slowed and her heart rate decreased as she entered the focused state that had made her an excellent marksman during training. 30 seconds to distraction, she announced over the radio through her scope. Sarah could see the enemy snipers' positions clearly. They were focused on Bravo team's location and hadn't noticed that someone was targeting them from nearly 7 kilometers away. The distance was so great that even if they heard her shots, the bullets would hit them before the sound reached their position. 15 seconds. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger as she aligned the crosshairs on her first target. Everything she had learned about physics, ballistics, and precision shooting came together in this moment. The mathematical calculations that had always come naturally to her were now being applied to save lives. Distraction now. The sound of gunfire erupted from the village as Alpha team fired at the water tower. Sarah saw the enemy snipers turn their attention toward the noise, giving her the perfect opportunity. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot left her rifle and she immediately began cycling the bolt action while adjusting for the second target. She didn't wait to see the impact of the first bullet. There wasn't time. She had to trust her calculations and focus on the next shot. The second shot fired, and she was already moving to the third target. Her movements were smooth and automatic, the result of thousands of hours of practice that she had never imagined would be used in a situation like this. The third shot. Adjust for the fourth target. The enemy snipers still hadn't realized what was happening. The fourth shot rang out across the desert, and Sarah finally allowed herself to look through the scope to assess the results. At the ridge, the enemy sniper positions were silent. She couldn't see well enough at this distance to confirm individual hits, but there was no more muzzle flash coming from any of the 4 positions. Bravo team, the ridge is clear. Move to covering positions now. Base, the enemy sniper fire has completely stopped. We're moving to support the evacuation now. Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline as she realized what she had just accomplished. 4 precision shots at extreme range in less than 30 seconds. It was the kind of shooting that would be talked about in military training academies for years to come. But the mission still wasn't over. The enemy vehicles were still approaching, and everyone still needed to get to the extraction point safely. All teams, enemy vehicles are now approximately 5 minutes from your position. You need to move quickly to the new extraction point. As Sarah watched through her scope, she could see her fellow soldiers moving across the terrain with the rescued civilians. The mission that had started as a routine communication support role had become something she never could have imagined. And they still weren't out of danger yet. Through her scope, Sarah watched the combined teams moving quickly across the desert terrain toward the new extraction point. The rescued civilians, mostly women and children, were being helped along by Alpha and Charlie team members while Bravo team provided security. But the enemy vehicles were getting closer with each passing minute. Evac 1, what's your ETA to the alternate extraction point? Sarah transmitted while keeping her scope trained on the approaching threat. Base, we're 2 minutes out from the new landing zone. We can see your ground teams approaching from the south. Sarah shifted her scope to track the enemy vehicles. There were 3 trucks, not 2 as she had initially counted. Each vehicle appeared to be carrying at least 6 armed personnel. The math was simple and concerning. Her teams were outnumbered almost 3 to 1. And they had civilians to protect. All teams, be advised that enemy force consists of 3 vehicles with approximately 18 hostile personnel. You need to reach the extraction point before they get into firing range. Base, we're moving as fast as we can, but the civilians can't keep up this pace much longer. Alpha team leader responded. Breathing heavily from the exertion, Sarah could see the tactical problem developing through her scope. The enemy vehicles were following a dirt road that would bring them to the extraction point at almost the same time as her teams. If the helicopters were on the ground loading passengers when the enemy arrived, everyone would be trapped in the open with nowhere to take cover. Evac 1, can you provide any suppressive fire when you arrive at the extraction point? Negative, base, we're transport birds, not gunships. We're not equipped for combat support. Sarah studied the terrain between the enemy vehicles and the extraction point. The road they were following curved around a small hill before reaching the clearing where the helicopters would land. If she could disable the lead vehicle at the right spot, it might block the road and delay the other vehicles long enough for the evacuation to complete. The range to the road from her position was approximately 4,800 meters. Not as challenging as her previous shots, but she would be targeting a moving vehicle, rather than a stationary sniper. She would have to calculate not just the distance and wind, but also the speed and direction of the target. All teams, I'm going to attempt to disable the lead enemy vehicle to delay their approach. Continue moving to the extraction point at best possible speed. Sarah tracked the lead truck through her scope, timing its movement along the winding road. The vehicle was traveling at approximately 40 miles per hour, which meant she would have to lead the target significantly to account for its movement during the bullet's flight time. She aimed for the engine block of the truck, knowing that a hit there would be most likely to stop the vehicle completely. The bullet would take nearly 7 seconds to reach the target, during which time the truck would travel almost 250 meters down the road. Sarah lined up her shot at a point on the road where the truck would be when her bullet arrived. She squeezed the trigger and immediately began tracking the vehicle's progress through her scope, watching to see if her calculations had been correct. The truck continued moving for several long seconds, and Sarah began to think she had missed. Then suddenly the vehicle swerved off the road and came to a stop, smoke rising from under its hood. The 2 vehicles behind it had to brake hard to avoid a collision. Direct hit on the lead vehicle, Sarah announced over the radio. Enemy advance has been delayed, but they're dismounting and will continue on foot. Through her scope, she could see armed figures jumping out of the disabled truck and the two remaining vehicles. They would reach the extraction point on foot, but it would take them at least 10 more minutes, which might be enough time to complete the evacuation. Evac 1, you're clear to land at the extraction point. Enemy is delayed but still approaching. Copy that. Base, beginning our approach now. Sarah watched as the evacuation helicopters descended toward the clearing where her teams were arriving with the rescued civilians. The timing was going to be extremely close, but it looked like everyone might make it out safely. Alpha Team, start loading the civilians immediately when the helicopters touch down. Prioritize the children and elderly first. Roger, Base. We can see the birds coming in now. As Sarah watched the evacuation process begin, she noticed something that made her heart sink. One of the enemy vehicles was taking a different route, using a dry riverbed that would bring them to the extraction point from the opposite direction. They would arrive much sooner than the dismounted personnel from the disabled truck. All teams, you have a vehicle approaching from the northeast using the riverbed. ETA approximately 3 minutes. Sarah swiveled her rifle toward this new threat. The vehicle was moving fast along the rough terrain of the dry riverbed, bouncing and weaving as it navigated around boulders and debris. Hitting a moving target on uneven terrain at nearly 5 kilometers would be her most difficult shot yet. Evac 1, how long do you need to load all personnel? Base, we need at least 5 minutes to safely load everyone and take off. The math was impossible. The enemy vehicle would reach the extraction point in 3 minutes, but the evacuation needed 5 minutes to complete. Unless Sarah could stop that vehicle, her fellow soldiers and the rescued civilians would be caught in the open during the most vulnerable part of the evacuation. Bravo Team, can you establish a defensive perimeter around the landing zone? Already on it, Base, but we're outgunned if they get close enough for a firefight. Sarah tracked the vehicle through her scope as it bounced along the riverbed. The driver was good, using the natural terrain to make the vehicle a difficult target while maintaining maximum speed. She would have only one chance to make this shot count. She led the target by what she calculated to be the right amount. Accounting for the vehicle's speed, the uneven terrain that might cause it to slow down or speed up, and the wind conditions that had been gradually changing throughout the afternoon, the shot rang out across the desert. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet's path toward the moving vehicle. At first it looked like another hit as the vehicle suddenly swerved, but instead of stopping it recovered and continued moving toward the extraction point. Missed the target. Vehicle is still approaching, Sarah reported, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. Base, we can see dust clouds from their position. They'll be here in less than 2 minutes, Bravo team leader announced. Sarah cycled her rifle's bolt action and lined up for a second shot. The vehicle was closer now, which meant better accuracy but also less time to react. She would have to make this shot count because there wouldn't be time for a third attempt. As she prepared to fire, Sarah realized that everything that had happened during this mission had led to this moment. All her training, all her calculations, all her desire to make a real difference. It all came down to this one shot that could determine whether everyone made it home safely. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders as she placed her finger on the trigger and prepared to take the most important shot of her life. Sarah's breathing became perfectly controlled as she entered the zone of absolute focus she had discovered during this mission. The vehicle was now at 3,200 meters and closing fast. She could see individual figures inside the truck bed, weapons visible as they prepared for their assault on the extraction point. Time seemed to slow as Sarah made her final calculations. The vehicle was moving at approximately 50 miles per hour now, bouncing less as it reached smoother ground near the extraction point. She aimed for the front tire, knowing that even if she missed the engine block, a tire hit would likely cause the vehicle to crash at that speed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as the shot rang out. Sarah kept her eye pressed to the scope, tracking the bullet's path toward the moving target. The seconds stretched endlessly as she waited to see the result of what she knew might be her final opportunity to save her fellow soldiers. The vehicle suddenly veered hard to the left and flipped over, rolling several times before coming to rest on its side. Armed figures crawled out of the wreckage, but they were now on foot and much farther from the extraction point. Direct hit. Enemy vehicle is down, Sarah announced, feeling a surge of relief wash over her. Outstanding shooting, Base, came the response from Bravo team. We can see the crash site from here. Hostiles are on foot and disoriented. Sarah watched through her scope as the evacuation helicopters finished loading the rescued civilians. Alpha and Charlie teams were boarding the second helicopter, while Bravo team maintained their defensive perimeter. The dismounted enemy personnel from all three vehicles were still several minutes away from reaching the extraction point. Evac 1 and Evac 2, you are clear for immediate departure. All personnel and civilians are loaded. Copy that, base, both birds lifting off now. Through her scope, Sarah watched the helicopters rise into the desert sky with their precious cargo. The mission that had started as a routine communication support role had become something extraordinary. She had not only coordinated the entire operation from her position at base camp, but had personally eliminated multiple enemy threats at extreme range. As the helicopters disappeared into the distance, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax. Her hands were shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off, and she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. She had taken at least 7 precision shots at ranges that most military snipers would consider impossible, and she had done it while simultaneously coordinating a complex multi-team operation. Base, this is Alpha Team Leader, came the voice through her headset. All teams and civilians are safely aboard the evacuation helicopters. Mission accomplished. Roger, Alpha Team. Congratulations on a successful rescue operation. Sarah began packing up her equipment, preparing to return to her communication tent. The desert was quiet now, with only the distant dust clouds from the approaching enemy reinforcements visible on the horizon. Those reinforcements would find nothing but an empty village and disabled vehicles when they arrived. As she walked back toward the base camp, Sarah's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from headquarters. Base, this is General Morrison. I need to speak with Communications Specialist Martinez immediately. Sarah's heart rate increased again. Had she done something wrong? Had she overstepped her authority by taking those shots? She had acted on instinct and training, but she had definitely gone far beyond her assigned role as a communications specialist. This is Martinez, sir. Go ahead. Martinez, I've been monitoring the radio traffic from this operation. Did you take those long-range shots that disabled the enemy threats? Sarah hesitated for a moment before responding. Yes, sir. I had a clear line of sight from my position at base camp, and the tactical situation required immediate action. There was a long pause before General Morrison responded. Martinez, what's your longest confirmed hit during training? Sir, my personal best at the range was 800 meters. Another pause. And today you made multiple hits at ranges exceeding 6,000 meters while coordinating a complex rescue operation? Yes, sir. The calculations were challenging, but the physics principles are the same regardless of distance. Sarah could hear voices in the background at headquarters, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. Finally, General Morrison came back on the radio. Martinez, when you return to base, report directly to my office. We need to have a serious conversation about your role in this organization. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She was probably going to be disciplined for abandoning her communications post and acting outside her assigned duties. But as she thought about the rescued civilians and her fellow soldiers who were now safely aboard the evacuation helicopters, she realized she would make the same choices again. Yes, sir. I'll report to your office upon return to base. As Sarah reached her communication tent, she found several other communications specialists staring at her with expressions of amazement and disbelief. Word of what had happened during the mission was already spreading throughout the base camp. Is it true you made those impossible shots? Asked Corporal Jenkins, one of the newer communications personnel. I just did what needed to be done, Sarah replied, beginning to shut down her radio equipment. But those were like record-breaking distances. How did you even know you could make shots like that? Sarah thought about the question for a moment. I didn't know. I just knew I had to try. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself standing outside General Morrison's office, still wearing her dusty combat gear from the mission. She had spent the helicopter ride back to base thinking about how to explain her actions and what the consequences might be. Come in. Martinez, General Morrison called out when she knocked on his door. Sarah entered the office and stood at attention in front of the general's desk. General Morrison was a tall, imposing man with gray hair and intense eyes that seemed to see everything. He gestured for her to sit down in the chair across from his desk. Martinez, in my 30 years in the military, I have never seen anything quite like what happened today, he began. You coordinated a complex rescue operation, provided battlefield intelligence to multiple teams, and made at least 7 confirmed kills at ranges that most people would consider impossible. Sarah remained silent, unsure how to respond. "The question I have for you is simple," General Morrison continued. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" "Sir, I learned basic marksmanship during standard training, but mostly I taught myself the advanced calculations using physics and mathematics textbooks." General Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. "Martinez, do you realize that your longest shot today was over 7,800 meters? That's not just a military record, that's a world record by a significant margin." Sarah felt her eyes widen in surprise. She had been so focused on the tactical situation during the mission that she hadn't really considered the historical significance of the distances involved. "Sir, I was just trying to help my fellow soldiers complete their mission." "I understand that, Martinez, but what you accomplished today changes everything. The question now is, what do we do with someone who has capabilities like yours?" Sarah looked at General Morrison, realizing that her life in the military was about to change dramatically. The support role she had grown comfortable with was about to become something entirely different. "Sir, I just want to continue serving and helping protect people." General Morrison smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Martinez, I think we can arrange for you to help protect a lot more people than you ever imagined. But first, I need to ask you one more question." "Yes, sir. That shot that eliminated the sniper in the water tower and saved Alpha Team, who took that shot?" Sarah looked directly at General Morrison and answered with confidence she had never felt before in her military career. "I did, sir. Welcome to a whole new world, Martinez. Your real service to your country is just beginning."